If you've ever wondered what the best-selling luxury vehicle in America has been for the last decade and a half, the Lexus RX has comfortably held that title for years. Now for 2020, Lexus is making some pretty extensive updates to their bestseller, changing the front and rear styling, updating the interior tech features, revising the suspension, but above all, adding this delicious shade of nori green pearl. All right, that was not as graceful as I thought. So if you've ever wondered what continues to make the RX the best-selling luxury vehicle in the States, that's what we're here to find out after I'm finished eating. So typically I start out these reviews with an introduction, then we go into the exterior walk around, interior. There's like a whole schedule that I usually go through with every video, but I thought I would mix it up a little bit to kind of keep you guys on your toes. So I'm gonna start off this video with driving the RX, because let's be honest here, people buy a Lexus RX for several reasons, but the number one reason has always been its plush and cushy ride quality. And Lexus actually said that they tweaked the suspension on the 2020 model to give this car better handling and an even cushier ride quality. Now, sitting in these seats, I have to say that the RX still offers one of the most plush seats that you can sit in. The leather is really high quality feeling. They're really soft, really supple, really supportive. The car has a really soft, floaty ride quality that a lot of buyers in this segment really appreciate. Even this model here with the 20-inch wheels still has an amazingly smooth ride quality. The visibility in here is also really nice. You can see out of it very well. It's very quiet in here. I mean, this particular one here is the hybrid version, which means it has the ability to run on electric power alone up to about 20 miles an hour. So right now it's showing EV mode over there in the tachometer. So we're just cruising along with no engine. And if you put your foot down just a little bit though, this is the older 3-motor hybrid system from Toyota and Lexus. So it doesn't really allow that much cruising on electric power alone. As soon as you put your foot down a little bit, you can hear the gas engine turns on to provide additional power for this vehicle. Basically, if you always wanted a smooth and serene luxury cruiser, the RX has always been that vehicle to fit the bill. And this new one, with the new tuning for the suspension, the tweaks to the steering, this is an even more plush car. Handling wise, I wouldn't say this is any sportier. The RX has always been a really soft and just numb feeling car, and it's still kind of the case even with the tweaks to the suspension. So how a vehicle drives is always important, but the other part where Lexus is really doing well in terms of their reputation has always been interior quality. So let's look at some of the changes that Lexus has made for the 2020 model. So another area where Lexus is very much well known for can be found when you look at their really plush interiors, especially the Lexus RX. This interior has long been the standard in terms of build quality, in terms of luxury, in terms of just overall refinement. Now the door there, I was surprised, didn't really have that solid of a thunk. There was actually a slight rattle too, so that wasn't really nice to hear. Now looking at the rest of this cabin, I have to say, if I was looking at this interior back in 2010, I would be very impressed with the design. But today in 2020, I have to say the steering wheel looks pretty old. It even has kind of this old school wood. The wheel itself does have some really nice leather. I like the bronze color that you have on the Lexus badge. But as you can see here, very old Toyota cruise control stock. They've been using this little piece here for like the last 20 years. The window controls, one touch for all four. They actually do have a nice high quality feel, and the materials in here are pretty good, although I will say some of the competitors from Europe have really stepped up their game and have real more leather stitching, real aluminum, real wood. The Lexus has some real wood trim, but I'm not really the biggest fan of the way the wood trim looks. The aluminum trim look that you see here is actually not real. It's just a silver painted plastic. But overall, I think there could be more stitching on the door panels, and on the dash here, it's got some faux stitching. But I think that it just has a look that really reminds me of the early 2000 eras. It almost seems like Lexus hasn't left that. Now, the biggest change that they've done for 2020 is this infotainment system. What they've done is they've actually pushed the screen a little bit further. It's a 12.3-inch display. This was the first Lexus model to get this large display, and it actually matches the size of the Toyota Highlander, the new version. And the biggest addition, they finally made this a touchscreen. So of course we all kept complaining about the horrible remote touchpad interface, and Lexus has finally made this thing a touchscreen, which really is the biggest addition that they could have added for the longest time. I don't particularly love the interface still. For example, if you push the menu button down here, it brings you all your different usual sources and whatnot. Going back to the CarPlay, that's kind of where this thing really looks impressive because it takes up the entire screen. But overall, I do find that the screen, even though they pushed it forward, is still a little bit too far back for my reach with my short arms. Now, putting the vehicle into reverse, you can see there is a full 360 camera with this car. Now, if you push this button here on the left side, when it's not in reverse, it'll actually give you a cool little panoramic view, a perimeter scan showing what's exactly around the vehicle. Now, I will say the competitors do offer a much more brighter looking screen. The screen for some reason looks pretty dim, but I really like the 360 perimeter scan. Overall, the size of the screen is good, but I do think that it's still a little bit too far, especially for somebody who has short arms like myself. Now over here, you still have this wonderful Lexus touchpad here that looks like a mouse pad or a trackpad that was on your computer. The shifter here looks like it came out of a car that was, you know, from 10 years ago, because it is, although some of you may prefer the traditional shifter instead of those electronic ones. There's a little place here where you can put your phone. Unfortunately, I don't see any wireless charger in here. That would be nice to have. There's a little bit more storage over here. You've got 2 USB ports. And then this area here has some very soft leather, which is nice. And if you open this up, you can see pretty deep storage area. This is the connector for the Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. You need to plug it into this particular one here. The seats are also very plush. That's what Lexus are very much known for. You've got this really soft, cushy leather. The seats are heated and cooled, heated in the second row. But if you're looking for things like ventilated seats in the second row, Lexus does not offer that. You do get at least a heated steering wheel. And above me, there's just a standard sunroof. For some reason, Lexus doesn't offer a pano sunroof on this car, which is funny because Toyota offers it on the new Highlander. So I imagine that the next generation RX will get that feature. Keep in mind, we've got an all-new version of the RX coming for 2022. Until then, this one here still has some pretty nice features, but you should know that it doesn't feel quite as roomy, and it's still kind of meshed with a newer technology here and then an older design to the dashboard and to the overall steering wheel. The one thing I forgot to mention was the sound system from that clip. The 15-speaker Mark Levinson in this car is pretty good. It's basically on par with the best that you're going to get from the Germans. It really adds to the whole luxury ambiance with this car. That was a really interesting noise that this car made when I put my foot down, so let's pop open that hood and see what's powering this thing. Under the hood of the 2020 Lexus RX, you're going to find a choice of 2 different powertrains. Most people will probably end up getting the standard RX 350, which has a 3.5-liter V6. Numbers are unchanged. You still get 295 horsepower and about 263 pound-feet of torque. Now, this one here is the more unique model because it's the RX 450 HL, which means you've got the hybrid system. So it pairs a 3.5-liter naturally aspirated V6 with 3 electric motors because this thing comes standard with all-wheel drive. The rear motor is just all electric, so technically if this car ever ran out of battery power, which it shouldn't, this will divert to just being a front-wheel drive car. Now, because the hybrid system offers 3 electric motors, it offers 308 horsepower, around 247 pound-feet of torque. So this is technically the faster between the 2 engine options, but you should know that the hybrid model is considerably heavier. You're going to add roughly around 400 pounds of weight, especially when you factor in that this one here is the heavier L. It weighs just under 5,000 pounds. Now, it all goes out through a continuously variable transmission when you get the hybrid system. The regular V6 will have an 8-speed automatic, and this is an SUV, so it still is able to tow a decent amount. All RX models will tow a maximum of 3,500 pounds as they're equipped. The hybrid version does get pretty good gas mileage. It's rated at 29 in the city, 28 on the highway because this is the L version. If you guys divert to the shorter wheelbase version, it'll get around 30 mpg combined. So decent fuel economy numbers, but the RX is still a pretty heavy vehicle. Now, Lexus says 0 to 60 in about 8 seconds with the L version, because remember, this is about 200 pounds heavier than the non-L. And by the numbers, this is a rather sluggish SUV on paper, considering the price point. It is pretty heavy. It could also be a little bit more responsive. This is a CVT. It's not the transmission that we find in like a Lexus LS 500HL or an LC 500H because it doesn't have that parallel system where it's got a 4-speed auto that mates with a CVT to create a 10-speed transmission. All I noticed when I put my foot down, there is a noticeable delay for the CVT to drop down the ratios. But once it drops down those ratios, it is a quick accelerating car. It feels much torquier than its numbers would suggest. And remember, this has 308 horsepower, so it technically has more horsepower, about 13 more horsepower than the gas-only version. And this has roughly 50 more horsepower than what you're going to find in the new Highlander hybrid, because Toyota moved to a 4-cylinder hybrid system, whereas Lexus still uses this V6, which has a surprisingly decent noise. I'm actually really impressed with the sound. It's not the usual buzzy, drony 4-cylinder drone that you get out of most of the competitors. Lexus actually made paddle shifters standard equipment on every RX for 2020, which they don't really work the way I expect paddles to. Like, for example, right now I'm pulling the paddle and it's not even mimicking the shift. So I'm imagining if you guys drive the 8-speed auto that's in the gas-only version, that will be slightly better versus what you get, with this CVT with the paddles. They just are kind of there as an afterthought for me. So some of you may be wondering what the L means in RX 450HL. That's quite a mouthful for a name. So let's figure out what that actually means. So this particular one here is the long wheelbase L version, which means it's about 4 inches longer than the standard RX, which also means that Lexus charges you about $4,000 more money for this one. Basically, Lexus is charging you about $1,000 for every extra inch. Now that extra length gives you a little surprise in the back seat, which let me show you guys what that little surprise is. Now obviously all RX models are going to have a pretty spacious second row, but the L version gives you this little small third row of seats back there, so it increases the seating capacity to 6 on this particular one because it has the captain's chairs. Now, oh dear, I'm not the tallest person in the world. I'm about 5'7". Ugh. And I have to say, getting back here into the third row, this is a pretty small area. Lexus says you get around 22 inches of legroom. I had to do a double take because 22 inches of legroom is about 8 inches shorter than you'd find in something like an economy subcompact car. So this is pretty much not even reserved for children because this back seat is pretty useless, this third row that is. Now, let me hop into the second row here to show you guys the space here because maybe this is a little bit better. Oh. Now, first of all, to actually have the space that you saw back there, I had to have the second row pushed up like this to where my knees are basically into the seat backs of the front seat. So if I plop this seat all the way back to its farthest position, oh dear. You better basically have no legs if you're gonna sit in the third row to actually use the second row. But keep in mind, even with the second row all the way back, Lexus says you get around 31 inches of legroom back here, which is about 7 inches less than what you're gonna get in the Toyota Highlander, which makes the RX L a really confusing addition because the space in here just isn't all that good. So I know I had mentioned that Lexus moved the screen a little bit closer to actually make this usable as a touchscreen. As you can see, while I'm driving, it's still a little bit of a far reach. So obviously the interior is still very comfortable, if a little bit dated feeling, but they also made some changes to the styling of this thing front and rear. So let's go over some of the changes that Lexus made so you can tell the difference between a pre-refreshed model and this refreshed 2020 version. So this generation RX came out back in 2016, and as you can see, the front fascia doesn't really look all that different unless you have the old one parked next to it. Really what you're going to notice are a few things. This one here is the hybrid version, so it has its own unique grille with the blue outlined Lexus badge. The grille itself is a slightly wider spindle. The headlights are slightly more skinny to give this thing a little bit more of an aggressive look. This particular one here has the optional premium triple beam LED headlights. And overall, I was never really a fan of the styling of this generation RX, but feel free to let me know in the comments below what you guys think of the updated look. So after torturing myself in the second and third row of this thing, I'm wondering where the hell is the space in this thing? Maybe Lexus put it in the actual cargo area of the RXL. Now opening up the tailgate, you can see power liftgate, that's included in a luxury model. And when you look at the actual cargo space, it's actually not bad when you have the third row seats up. You're looking at around 17 cubic feet. Now, obviously this is smaller than what you're gonna get in the Highlander in the Telluride than the MDX, for example. And if you open up this area here, you can see there's a small storage, underfloor storage area. You can put your cargo cover under there. And if you want to fold the seats down, Lexus makes it pretty easy. You just push this button near here, and the third row is electrically foldable, which does take a second. Unfortunately, you have to keep holding the button. It's not like a one-touch system. But once you fold down the third row, there's actually a pretty decent amount of space here. I would say you get just under 35 cubic feet of space, which is comparable to what you get in a lot of compact SUVs. I am noticing the floor here is very high. I'm not entirely sure why the load floor is pretty high. If you fold down the second row as well, Lexus says you get around 58.9 cubic feet of space, which is pretty paltry. I was expecting something like this would have around 75 cubic feet of space. This is less space than what you're gonna get in something like, you know, a Toyota RAV4 that would have more cargo capacity. Now, closing this rear liftgate, you probably noticed the styling is also a little bit different when you look at the back. The tail lights are mostly just refreshed. They are a full LED design now. Lexus has replaced the incandescent turn signals with an LED turn signal, and they have a slightly different look to them. But overall, you probably need to park this car next to the old model to see all the changes. So the Lexus RX may not be the most engaging car to drive. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the competitive set here. You can compare this car to an Acura MDX, obviously, the Lincoln Aviator. You can compare it to the German competition, the Infiniti QX60. I would argue that a lot of people probably don't cross-shop this with a lot of the German competitors. They are considerably more expensive. The RX caters to a specific type of buyer. MDX is probably the biggest cross-shopper with this car. The Acura is far more sporty than the Lexus, but I would say that the Lexus has a slightly better infotainment system, especially now that they've added the touchscreen interface. It's got a softer ride quality. The seats are also very plush, but the problem with this car is that horrible interior, which isn't very useful in terms of space. The lack of space in this car for how big it is on the outside is just perplexing to me. I mean, obviously you can tell that Lexus was very much rushing to give dealers a car that had a third row, even though it's just a third row that's practically useless even for kids. So for the next generation model, which is coming for 2022, there are a lot of expectations here because Lexus have always dominated this segment, but we've got cars coming up like the Genesis GV80, of course, the new Lincoln Aviator. It's going to put a big, nasty dent in the Lexus's armor. So unless they do something super drastic for the next gen model, I wouldn't expect this to continue to be the best-selling luxury vehicle in America. There are a few weaknesses that are really easy to point out in this car, and it doesn't really make sense as the long wheelbase version. I think that more people are obviously buying the short wheelbase RX, and there's a reason for that. So in terms of fuel economy, the hybrid version is rated to get 29 mpg combined, 30 if you guys go for the shorter wheelbase version, the non-L. In my week's worth of testing, the trip computer says I've been averaging around 24 mpg, which is not bad. I got better mpg in the Highlander hybrid that I had a couple of weeks ago. That one got roughly a couple mpg more. On the highway, it would do significantly better. So obviously, the 6-cylinder model is going to be a little bit thirstier, but I do like and appreciate the extra power that this gives you. So I'll be curious to see whatever Lexus decides to do. I think they should beef up the battery on this car and make it a plug-in hybrid. We should be able to get like 50 miles on electric-only range. They've got that coming up in the Toyota RAV4 Prime, so I would like to see that powertrain make it over to a Lexus model. So just like all the previous RX models before this one, this current version has all the usual positives that we like about the RX. It's very comfortable, it's very plush, it's very quiet, it has a very large infotainment screen, which is going to be great for people who like to buy these things. Unfortunately, the RX also has suffered a lot from Lexus kind of resting on their laurels, because this one here has a sticker price of around $65,000. $65,000. Now granted, this is the most expensive way that you can get an RX because it's the ultra luxury package model, has basically every option to it. Now, when you start looking at the competitive set for the Lexus RX, you could compare it to all the European entries like the new Mercedes, the new BMW, the new Volvo XC90. However, I imagine most people cross-shop an RX with things like an Acura MDX Sport Hybrid or something like the Lincoln Aviator, which is again all new for 2019. When you start looking at those competitors, the Lexus really has some problems, and it's really kind of centered around its super cramped interior, which, as you guys saw, completely useless in the second and third rows. The front seats are nice, the cargo area is small, and really my hopes and expectations are very high for the next generation version of the Lexus RX. I expect this model to be way sleeker looking. I expect it to offer way more power, improve the fuel economy, and above all, I expect it to offer way more interior space, because I think the biggest threat to the Lexus RX is the new Genesis GV80. Whenever that goes on sale later this year, for around $60,000 as well, you're gonna get things like a twin turbo V6, a much nicer interior with way more space, and a better warranty. So again, Lexus may have its reputation as being reliable, having strong resale value, but there really is very little reason to choose the RX over its main competition unless you guys really go for the standard wheelbase model. I think the standard wheelbase model is a little bit more enticing. The long wheelbase version just doesn't make sense because of its poor packaging on the inside and that useless third row seats. But with all that said, I hope you guys have enjoyed my full overview on the 2020 Lexus RX 450 HL. If you're also looking to see the latest cars I'm testing, be sure to follow me on Instagram at redline_reviews, like us on Facebook, and as always guys, please keep subscribing to the Redline Reviews YouTube channel for all the latest reviews. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.